Throughout the 30s, Pauling was unmatched in both the lab and the lecture theatre. Pauling's lack of talent for office politics was becoming painfully clear. Chemists were meant to talk about bond lengths and lattice enthalpies, not the perils of totalitarianism. Addis's faith in the role of diet and supplemental vitamins in human health deeply affected Pauling. The more successful he became, the more faith he placed in his scientific intuition. Faith that would go on to blind him. The Cold War was a strange time for science. The United States and the USSR had taken the lessons of Hiroshima to heart. The battle between capitalism and communism would not just be fought on the battlefields of Korea and Vietnam, but in the laboratory. Investment in the physical sciences exploded, and few scientists benefited from this windfall more than Pauling. By this point in his career, Pauling had cemented himself as one of the greatest scientists in America. He secured a $700,000 grant from the Rockefeller Foundation for molecular biology, one of the largest grants in Caltech's history. His textbooks were being used across the Western world. He was awarded a string of honorary doctorates from some of the most prestigious universities in the world. But American politics was changing. The 1946 midterms were a disaster for the Democratic Party. Harry Truman lost both the House and the Senate to the Republican candidate Thomas Dewey. Truman's persecution of socialists and his hardline stance against the USSR angered the left of the party, and his sympathies with the civil rights movement in the South angered conservative Dixiecrats. The Democratic Party split down the middle. On the left was Henry Wallace, an ardent New Dealer who was vehemently opposed to segregation. After being sacked from Truman's cabinet for sprinkling his speeches with pro-Soviet rhetoric, Wallace founded the Progressive Party in 1948. On the right was Strom Thurmond from South Carolina, a staunch supporter of segregation who founded the States' Rights Democratic Party, a man so racist he would go on to give a 24-hour filibuster against the Civil Rights Act. Sure would be embarrassing if he fathered a child with a 16-year-old black housekeeper. Oh no. Ava and Linus supported the Progressive Party, but as the 1948 election grew near, the outlook for the left looked increasingly bleak. Afraid of splitting the vote, Ava bottled it and voted for Truman, but Linus stuck to his guns and cast a vote for Wallace. On the morning of November the 3rd, the Chicago Daily Tribune broke the story. Dewey defeats Truman, just as the polls expected. Except the paper was wrong. In one of the biggest upsets in American political history, Truman won back the Senate and the House, snagging the Democrats a 5th consecutive term in office. Wallace and Thurmond scraped just over 2% of the popular vote, winning Thurmond. Wait, 4 states? Jesus Christ. Pauling was growing disillusioned with the Democrats. Under Truman's watch, the powers of the House Un-American Activities Committee were greatly expanded. Paranoia about communist infiltration reached a fever pitch. Academics had to take loyalty oaths to continue receiving funding from the federal government, a process Pauling found disturbing and totalitarian. In 1946, the physicist Lee Dubridge was made president of Caltech. If Pauling was a man of principle, Dubridge was a man of business. A moderate Democrat, Dubridge endeared himself to staff early on by increasing the pay of lecturers by 30%, but he knew that to keep the university in the black, he would have to stay on the government's good side. Dubridge privately urged Pauling to show restraint in his political speeches. Stick to the science. Pauling refused. In 1947, he signed an open letter calling for the abolition of both loyalty oaths and the House Un-American Activities Committee. That year, J. Edgar Hoover signed off on an FBI investigation. Since the end of the war, Pauling had been a member of the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, an organization founded by Albert Einstein in opposition to further development of atomic weapons. In 1950, Truman announced a program to develop the hydrogen bomb, a weapon that would maintain America's arms advantage over the Soviets. Pauling and Einstein were outraged. Pauling gave a speech to a full house at Carnegie Hall, condemning Truman's decision in the strongest possible terms. Less than a year later, he would find himself in court. In 1950, a Russian-American physicist by the name of Sidney Weinbaum was arrested. Weinbaum had emigrated to the US in 1922 and completed his PhD in physics under Linus Pauling. After securing a job in the aviation industry, Weinbaum's past came back to haunt him. He had been a member of a communist debate society when he was a student at Caltech, a death sentence for his career in the 50s. After Weinbaum's arrest, his wife suffered a nervous breakdown. Sympathetic to his ex-student's situation, Pauling agreed to help fund his legal expenses, and Ava frequently checked up on his wife. little did Pauling know that his wife's visits were being monitored by FBI agents. The government was investigating him for communist espionage. Linus Pauling was not a supporter of the USSR. The authoritarian nature of Soviet science appalled him. Lysenkoism, a theory that plants and animals change their characteristics through environmental classes rather than genetics, was heavily pushed under Joseph Stalin. Under Stalin's regime, geneticists were imprisoned, and Lysenkoist farming practices led to the deaths of millions in the USSR and China. Ironically, Pauling's theory of resonance was denounced by the Soviet Academy of Sciences in 1951 as Western claptrap, the ravings of a bourgeois American chemist that ran contrary to dialectical materialism. But while Pauling was not a communist, he firmly believed that scientific cooperation between the US and the Soviets was in the interest of both countries. Pauling didn't think he was an extremist. He was a New Dealer Democrat that believed in a strong welfare state and freedom of academic expression. To others, he was a dangerously naive radical, playing into the hands of the enemy. Not wanting to look soft on communist sympathisers, Dubridge had Pauling placed under an internal investigation. The investigation found nothing, but the government was not convinced. In November 1950, Pauling was dragged into court for a grueling 2-hour interview on his loyalty to the United States. When asked if he had ever been a member of the Communist Party, Pauling considered the question beneath him. He refused to answer. Dubridge's office was flooded with letters from conservatives demanding Pauling's head on a spike. Pauling was too stubborn to testify under duress, but after consulting with his friends, a compromise was struck. Pauling wrote Dubridge a 3-page letter on his political beliefs, with a note that he may share it with anyone he wished. I am not personally sympathetic to the extremes of belief and policy that I understand some communists to hold, but I feel that we must staunchly support the basic principles of our democracy, including the right of people to hold even extreme political beliefs. Dubridge made the note public. Pauling kept his job by the skin of his teeth. Up until the 1950s, the role of DNA in plants and animals was poorly understood. Pauling, as did most scientists of his day, assumed DNA was merely a structural component of cells. If DNA was involved in genetic inheritance, it was a minor player. But the structure of DNA remained elusive. While on holiday in 1947, Pauling was cornered by a man called Erwin Chargaff while taking a ferry to the UK. Chargaff, a biochemist by training, boasted to Pauling about his brilliant new results on DNA bases. The ratios of adenine to thymine and guanine to cytosine were nearly 1-to-1. Clearly a breakthrough in the structure. Off-put by Chargaff's pushiness, Pauling cuts him off, thanks him for his time, and goes back to his family. He would later kick himself for not hearing him out. On the 28th of February 1951, Pauling's 50th birthday, he sends off a manuscript to the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. What followed was a series of 7 groundbreaking papers in the field of biochemistry. Pauling announced the discovery of the alpha helix, one of the most important structural components in proteins. Pauling deduced the alpha helix and the beta-pleated sheet, another structural component, were the main building blocks of proteins. Analytical chemists and biologists recognized Pauling's work as decade-defining. Pauling was at the top of his game, a master of chemistry, biology, and all that lied between. All that was left was the grand prize of DNA. In December 1952, Pauling submitted one last paper on proteins. He proudly announced to the world he had cracked DNA's structure. The mystery molecule was a triple helix. Wait, what?
Oh, you got it wrong. No, it's not easy, is it?
In December 1951, the American postdoc James Watson received a Christmas present from his collaborator at the Cavendish Laboratory, Francis Crick. It was a copy of The Nature of the Chemical Bond by Linus Pauling. Watson and Crick were men on a mission. They knew Pauling was investigating the structure of DNA, and they were determined to beat him at his own game. The biophysicist Maurice Wilkins took X-ray spectra of DNA, suggesting the molecule had a repeating helical structure. In autumn 1951, Watson and Crick used Pauling's book to construct a preliminary model of DNA, similar to the one Pauling himself would present 12 months later. A triple helix made from negatively charged phosphate groups, bound together with positive magnesium ions. When they showed their model to the X-ray crystallographer Rosalind Franklin, she was not convinced. There was no evidence for magnesium ions in the chains, and the model didn't account for water content. The magnesium ions would be surrounded by water molecules, neutralizing the charge. The structure was unstable. As Watson and Crick went back to the drawing board, Pauling independently theorized that DNA was a triple helix. In Pauling's model, the phosphates were packed on the inside of the chain and held together with hydrogen bonds. It was beautiful, ingenious, a certified Linus Pauling classic. And it was wrong. In Pauling's model, the chains were packed too tightly together. The negative charges would repel each other. Pauling's paper was a rush job. He knew that DNA was a tough puzzle to crack, and he put too much faith in his chemical intuition. On the 25th of April, 1953, Watson and Crick submitted a paper to Nature that would win them the 1962 Nobel Prize for Medicine. Franklin's X-rays showed, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that DNA was a double helix. Watson and Crick worked out that DNA was kept together with ATGC base pairs, adenine to thymine and guanine to cytosine in a 1-to-1 ratio, just as Chargaff said there was. And the world's greatest structural chemist had been beaten by 2 grad students with his own textbook. The embarrassment of the triple helix ate away at Pauling. But good news would soon come from Stockholm. In the 1950s, the Nobel Prize was not the Lifetime Achievement Award that it is today. Einstein was only 42 when he won the Nobel Prize for Physics. James Watson was only 34 when he, Crick and Wilkins were jointly awarded the prize for medicine. Controversially, Rosalind Franklin was not credited on the Nature paper. Her X-ray data was used without her permission, and she died of an aggressive case of ovarian cancer before she could be credited with the Nobel Prize. Pauling was 53. He was growing increasingly paranoid he had missed his chance. The Nobel Committee favoured flashy, singular discoveries. Pauling feared his work on structural chemistry was too broad. But he needn't have worried. On November the 3rd, 1954, 6 years to the day of Henry Wallace's embarrassing defeat to Harry Truman, Pauling received a call from a reporter. "Professor Pauling, what is your reaction to winning the Nobel Prize?" When Pauling was awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, his colleagues at Caltech were ecstatic. In the eyes of the scientific community, a trip to Stockholm was long overdue. There was just one problem. Pauling didn't have a passport. In 1952, the head of the passport division, Ruth Shipley, banned Linus Pauling from renewing his passport on security grounds. Shipley was deeply paranoid about communist infiltration. Wherever she looked, she saw communist agents. And throughout the 1950s, she flagrantly abused her powers to target left-wingers, often with little evidence. When she read Pauling's FBI file, it didn't matter that there was no proof linking him to the Communist Party. In her mind, Pauling was a Red, and allowing him to travel would threaten the security of the United States. Pauling tried in vain to get his passport renewed for 2 years. When Pauling was awarded the Nobel Prize, Shipley wanted to block him from travelling to Sweden, but wanting to avoid bad publicity, her superiors overruled her. It was a rare political win for Pauling. A few months later, Shipley retired. Some scientists fared better than others throughout the Red Scare. The physicist Edward Teller was one. In many ways, he was Pauling's opposite. After fleeing from Hungary as a young man, Teller grew to hate communism. He believed the only way to prevent the Soviets from taking over the world was for the US to maintain a permanent arms advantage. Throughout the war, Teller enthusiastically pushed for the development of the hydrogen bomb. In 1954, Teller's former boss, Robert Oppenheimer, was put under investigation for links to communist groups. Oppenheimer was definitely left-wing, but the historical consensus is that he never shared details on atomic weapons with the Soviets. Teller testified against Oppenheimer. He would never work in government or atomic energy ever again. Pauling did not like Oppenheimer, but he saw the investigation for what it was. Teller had participated in a witch hunt against a loyal scientist on the basis of personal politics. Pauling grew to loathe him. After winning the Nobel Prize, Pauling's scientific output slowed to a crawl. He directed much of his efforts towards nuclear disarmament and a ban on nuclear tests. Teller was an advocate for nuclear tests. He claimed that the fallout from testing was less dangerous than being a pound overweight, and he even went as far to say that a little radiation might be good for us. Pauling's reply was brutal.
"My clock is not keeping perfect time. It is conceivable that it will run better if I shoot a bullet through it, but it is much more probable that it will stop altogether."
Throughout the late 50s and early 60s, Pauling was instrumental in changing public perception with overground nuclear tests. He gave lectures on strontium-90, a radioactive isotope that is produced in overground nuclear tests. By the early 60s, strontium-90 was now so abundant in air it was beginning to deposit itself in bone marrow and children's baby teeth. Linus and Ava organised a petition to halt overground testing to the UN. The final signature count of scientists and politicians was 11,021. By the time John F. Kennedy entered the White House, a man that both Linus and Ava had voted for, Pauling had made almost as big a name for himself as a peace activist as well as a scientist. In 1961, Pauling and Teller were placed on the cover of Time magazine, honouring the scientists of America. And also this other guy, Robert Burns Woodward. So let's get back to chemistry for a bit. Similar to Pauling, Woodward was a child prodigy. After completing his PhD when he was 20 years old, Woodward established himself as one of the greatest organic chemists of his generation. After finding the first artificial synthesis routes for chlorophyll and cholesterol, achievements that would later win him a Nobel Prize, Woodward turned his attention to the physics of organic reactions. The 50s was a period of stagnation for valence bond theory. Pauling was convinced, as he was 20 years ago, that resonance explained all we needed to know about chemical bonds. But as time ticked on, people found resonance theory increasingly hand-wavy and unreliable, and could be frequently abused to get the wrong answers. MO theory, meanwhile, was gaining acceptance in organic chemistry. Huckel's work from the 1930s had been re-examined, and people found it neatly explained the stability of cyclic compounds. Enter Roald Hoffmann, a brilliant young physical chemist that fled to America from Poland during the Holocaust. Hoffmann was the Pauling of the next generation, a natural scientific communicator that helped show synthetic chemists how powerful and portable MO theory really was. In 1965, Woodward and Hoffmann wrote a paper on an elegant theory that allowed chemists to easily predict the outcomes of ring rearrangement reactions. They would later be known as the Woodward-Hoffmann rules. The theory was brilliantly simple and crushing for VB theorists, as it only worked in the framework of molecular orbital theory. In 1960, the third edition of Nature of the Chemical Bond was published to mixed reception. Pauling's book contained several embarrassing errors and omissions. MO theory, which was now a staple of undergraduate chemistry courses, was barely mentioned. Pauling's description of boron compounds was wrong. His treatment of ferrocenes, a type of iron complex that could easily be described with MO modelling techniques, was cumbersome and poorly written. At the highest levels of theory, VB and MO modelling are equivalent to each other, but by the end of the 1960s, valence bond theory was unfairly considered to be a fossil from an earlier age. In the late 1960s, chemistry entered the computing age. MO modelling was far easier to implement on a computer than valence bond theory modelling was. The pencil and paper efficiency of VB theory was a relic from the 40s. Thanks in part to Pauling's reluctance to update his thinking for a new generation, the theory that won him a Nobel Prize entered a decline that it never recovered from. As his scientific output continued to slow, Pauling threw himself into anti-nuke activism. In 1961, Linus and Ava helped organise a conference on the proliferation of nuclear weapons in Oslo. A few months later, he sent telegrams to JFK and the Premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, on banning nuclear tests. Khrushchev sent him a letter explaining how disarmament would threaten the security of the Soviet Union. Kennedy ignores it. Soviet testing intensifies, leading to the detonation of the Tsar bomber on the 30th of October 1961. To this day, it remains the largest nuclear explosion in human history. In November of that year, Pauling made his first trip to the USSR. The scientific censorship of the Soviet Union softened under Khrushchev. Pauling was able to give a talk on his theories of resonance. Shortly after Pauling's trip, Kennedy authorized the first atmospheric nuclear tests since 1958. Pauling was furious. When he was invited to a White House dinner for American academics, Pauling, alongside 3,000 other protesters, picketed Kennedy on the White House lawn. In June 1962, Pauling received the greatest award of his career. At 61 years old, he was awarded a diploma from his old high school. In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world closer to nuclear war than at any point in human history. Kennedy had played hardball with the Soviets and won, but the experience had shaken him and Khrushchev deeply. Pauling kept up the pressure, and in June 1963, Kennedy announced an end to above-ground testing. Within a month, the Soviet Union followed suit. Pauling had been a tireless voice for peace, and he had yet again been vindicated. On October the 10th, 1963, Linus and Ava received a call from their daughter. She asked them if they had heard the news. Linus had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Gee, Herb, these woods sure are spooky at night. You're telling me, Gretchen. We've been wandering around for 6 hours now, and I don't know which way to go. Look, Gretchen, a signpost. Oh no! The signpost is written in some sort of crazy computer language. Herb, you have a master's degree in computeronics. What does it say? It's no use. I only know Pearl. Curse you, Larry Wall.
Worry not, travellers. I can show you how to read this cryptic language. Have you heard of Brilliant?
Oh, yeah, like the science app, right?
Don't interrupt! Brilliant is a platform where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in data analysis, artificial intelligence, and computer science. Each lesson is filled to the pant brims with hands-on problems for you to solve, made by a crack team of nerds from some of the most prestigious universities and companies on the planet. I don't need your trinkets, whimsical forest sprite. I can learn programming languages by watching lectures like I did in school. You know who learns programming by watching videos? Chumps!
That's who. Studies show that with Brilliant's exercises, you'll learn 6 times as quickly as watching lectures. Brilliant's course on Python teaches you programming from day one. You'll learn essential coding elements like for loops and conditionals, all while the app teaches your brain to think like a professional programmer. Before long, you'll make a habit of learning a little each day, instead of mindlessly scrolling on your mobile telephone. Maybe we should hear him out, Herb. How do we get onto this thing?
Just consult the ancient tree.
To try Brilliant for free for 30 days, please visit brilliant.org/mqtate or scan the QR code on screen. Wait, what?
Keep reading.
You'll also get a 20% off an annual premium subscription while supporting independent animation on YouTube. Well, time to start studying. Oh, okay, it's that way. Thank you, shambling demon. Wait, no, Larry Wall! When Pauling was nominated for a Nobel Prize in Chemistry, he was showered with praise. Chemists across the world thought the award was well deserved. Recognition for a brilliant career in structural chemistry. The Nobel Peace Prize was different. People were shocked. Linus Pauling? The cranky old man that picketed the White House? Why not JFK? Why not the submarine crews that prevented the breakout of nuclear war? Why not someone that actually changed things instead of whining about them to students? Life magazine published a brutal response.
In an extraordinary insult to America, Linus Pauling will collect $50,000 tax-free and another gold medal to line up beside the Nobel Prize he won for chemistry in 1954. However distinguished a chemist, the eccentric Dr. Pauling and his weird politics have never been taken seriously by American opinion. Why should a committee of 5 Norwegians be so taken in, or so rude?
On campus, things were little better. Pauling's friends were overjoyed with his achievement, but the rest of the school was strangely frosty. There was no party, no congratulations for the school's first double Nobel laureate. The Journal of the American Chemistry Society ran a single paragraph on Pauling's award in the back pages. But the biggest slap in the face came from Lee Bridge, who gave this statement to the press. The Nobel Peace Prize is a spectacular recognition of Dr. Pauling's long and strenuous efforts to bring before the people of the world the dangers of nuclear war and the importance of a test ban agreement. Though many people have disapproved of some of his methods and activities, he has nevertheless made a substantial impact on world opinion, as this award clearly proves. This backhanded compliment was the last straw. Pauling would barely speak to Dewbridge ever again. A few days after his statement, Pauling announced he was taking a leave of absence from Caltech. His colleagues of over 40 years were stunned. Many learned he was leaving from the papers. After leaving Caltech, Pauling took a position at the Centre for the Study of Democratic Institutions, a think tank for intellectuals across the political spectrum on the preservation of democracy. No matter how ill-founded Pauling's beliefs were, the world would have to listen. He called the space race a waste of time and money that could be better spent on medical research. When JFK was assassinated, he became convinced the plot had been organised by a cabal of Texas industrialists, right-wingers, and LBJ supporters. Other than a few open letters to the White House on automation and nuclear disarmament, Pauling's 4 years at the CSDI were fruitless. He became restless and increasingly litigious. With nothing but time on his hands, Pauling lashed out at the press that had sought to ruin him. The next few years of his life were spent in the courtroom. Pauling won a string of lawsuits against newspapers and anti-communist newsletters. The conservative magazine National Review, a thorn in Pauling's side for years, published an editorial calling him a megaphone for Soviet policy and accused him of collaborating with an enemy that had sworn to bury us. Pauling sued the magazine for libel to the tune of $1 million. He was unsuccessful and paid over $1,000 to their legal costs. In his old age, Pauling was becoming increasingly hard-headed. No one had the authority to tell him no anymore. With 2 Nobel Prizes to his name, Pauling could say what he liked, and no matter how wrong he was, the world would have to listen. It's unsettling how recently the scientific community tolerated eugenics. When we hear the word today, we think of swastikas and concentration camps, but the Nazis did not emerge from thin air. Men and women of Pauling's generation, especially those that were able-bodied, white, and performed well in standardized tests, considered eugenics to be a rational position, provided it was done in moderation. It was logical, neat, clean. A practical use of genetics to produce a healthier, happier human race. Old Adolf had just gotten a bit carried away. The American physicist William Shockley won a Nobel Prize 2 years after Pauling for helping invent the transistor. In the 1960s, Shockley became obsessed with the dysgenic effects of race mixing. He publicly aligned himself with white supremacists, advocated for the welfare system to be replaced with a voluntary sterilization program for those with an IQ of less than 100, and considered his own children genetic setbacks due to his first wife's low IQ. Shockley's children did not attend his funeral. James Watson, Pauling's competitor in the DNA race, would also find himself in hot water for parroting eugenicist rhetoric. In the 90s, Watson claimed that black people made for worse employees than white people, and that he was gloomy about the prospects of Africa because government policy assumed their intelligence is the same as ours, whereas all the testing says not really. The idea of a gay gene was popular in the 1990s. While homosexuality is now believed to result from a complex combination of genetics and environment, Watson believed if the gay gene existed, mothers should have the right to abort babies that carried it. Although, in fairness to him, other justifiable conditions were dyslexia, lack of musical ability, and being too short to play basketball. Pauling had more sense than Watson and Shockley, but he was not immune to the questionable takes of his day. To minimise the suffering of black children, Pauling believed that black people should be tested by law for sickle cell anemia. Carriers would then be marked with a tattoo to identify other carriers and avoid marrying them. Where would this tattoo be placed? The forehead, so it was easily identifiable. Even by the standards of the 1960s, this idea made many of Pauling's followers deeply uneasy. Pauling did not see how eugenics could be used to discriminate against people. In his mind, if it meant eradicating sickle cell anemia, it was for the greater good. They just didn't understand yet. In 1966, Pauling gave a speech on human health at an awards ceremony. He expressed his excitement for the medical discoveries of the future, and that he wanted to live another 15 or 20 years to see them. A few months later, Pauling received a letter from the biochemist Irwin Stone. A great admirer of Pauling's, Stone had spent much of his career in the brewing industry, researching food preservatives, and he had recently become interested in vitamin deficiencies. Stone told Pauling he was being too conservative. "You want to live an extra 20 years? How about 50? Pauling was intrigued. Stone was not a doctor. The medical establishment took a dim view of his work, and he struggled to get his research through peer review. His only credentials were 2 years of college chemistry and a PhD in chiropractic medicine. But Stone knew he was onto something big. In 1960, he and his wife were nearly killed after their car was struck by a drunk driver. their recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The key, he explained to Pauling, was large doses of vitamin C. Few could have predicted how much Stone's work on vitamin C would shape the next 25 years of Pauling's life. Most animals can produce their own vitamin C, but due to a mutation in the enzyme responsible for synthesizing it, primates, such as humans, must get vitamin C through their diets. Vitamin C deficiency leads to scurvy, a disease characterized by poorly healing wounds, easily bruisable skin, and swollen, bleeding gums. This is nothing new, of course. Vitamin C had been discovered in 1912. The British Navy had treated scurvy with lime juice and oranges since the 18th century. In the developed world, scurvy was nearly extinct. What was different about Stone's work is how much vitamin C humans needed to stay healthy. Stone had studied the vitamin C production of rats, and the medical establishment's maths wasn't adding up. In order to match the percentages of vitamin C that healthy rats produced, humans would need to eat far more vitamin C than doctors were currently prescribing. Stone believed that most humans suffered from chronic subclinical scurvy, a weakened state that makes us more susceptible to disease. Sure, we were taking enough vitamin C to stop our teeth from falling out, but that's very different to taking enough to stay healthy. In the words of Thomas Hager, giving someone enough vitamin C to prevent scurvy was like feeding them just enough to keep them from starving. Chronic subclinical scurvy is not recognised by most doctors today. According to the NHS website, adults need to consume at least 40 milligrams of vitamin C a day to stay healthy. The NIH in America is a bit bolder, with an RDA of 90 milligrams. You can get this pretty easily by eating oranges, potatoes, and leafy greens. Stone was taking 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, 33 times the NIH's recommended daily allowance, and 75 times the NHS's. Pauling was skeptical, but Stone was persuasive. With nothing to lose, Linus and Ava started taking vitamin C supplements. The common cold was the bane of Pauling's existence. Throughout his life, he had frequently suffered from colds and sinus infections, and had taken penicillin for 20 years. After taking vitamin C, the colds vanished. Pauling was astounded. He and his wife were more energetic, happier, and healthier. Unfortunately, the consensus belief is that Pauling's recovery was the result of the placebo effect. High oral doses of vitamin C won't kill you, but at least for most people, they can upset the stomach. At the doses Pauling was taking, vitamin C acts as a mild laxative, a side effect he later said could be mitigated by starting at smaller doses and working your way up to build up your tolerance. Pauling kept quiet about his little health secret for years. Keen to get back into science, Pauling took a leave of absence from the CSDI in 1967 to take a teaching post at UC San Diego. The board of directors prayed that Pauling would focus on his teaching duties, but he had only become bolder with age. Pauling joined the Peace and Freedom Party, a socialist organisation formed in opposition to the Democrats' support of the Vietnam War, with strong ties to the Black Panthers. His speeches at anti-war rallies horrified the board of directors. I believe in non-violence, but the establishment believes in violence. In force, in mace, napalm, police power, aerial bombing, nuclear weapons, war. As long as the selfishness of the establishment remains determinative, our hope that the coming revolution will be non-violent has little basis in reality. Within 2 years, Pauling was out from UC San Diego. He secured another teaching post at Stanford. It is here that his reputation dived off a cliff. In 1970, Pauling published Vitamin C and the Common Cold. The book was an immediate bestseller and had a seismic effect on the way an entire generation thought about vitamin C. In the book, Pauling claimed that 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day would reduce the instances of colds by 45%. In subsequent editions, he pushes for even higher doses. By this point, Pauling had nothing but disdain for the medical establishment. In his mind, doctors and medicinal chemists were too conservative and dismissive of new ideas. They wasted millions in taxpayer dollars every year with nothing to show for it, when they had a natural miracle cure right in front of them. It is hard to understand physicians, I must say. They believe in authoritarianism, and they apparently find it hard to understand that the world changes. Unfortunately for Pauling, in the 55 years since his book's publication, his claims have yet to be vindicated. There is no evidence that vitamin C in the doses that Pauling prescribed has any medicinal effect better than placebo. In fact, in high doses, it may actually slightly increase the risk of kidney stones in male patients. The quality of Pauling's work from this period was just sad. He cherry-picked studies that supported his arguments, and his clinical trials were shoddy. Some didn't have double-blind trials, and those that did flatlined on replication. Pauling stood firm. The data would vindicate him, just as it always had. But megavitamin therapy was no valence bond theory. In 1972, Pauling suffered a humiliating setback. PNAS, the journal that published his groundbreaking research on the alpha helix, rejected his paper on vitamin C, practically unheard of for a Nobel Prize winning chemist. Pauling was outraged. He took the rejection public and demanded another review. It was rejected again. Burning with resentment, Pauling publishes in a smaller journal, and increasingly turns to the public press. By 1973, Stanford was losing patience with their pet Nobel laureate. To bring in funding, Pauling opened the Institute for Science and Orthomolecular Medicine to continue his work on megavitamin therapy. The board soon votes to give it the catchier name, the Linus Pauling Institute. Pauling gives the reins to Art Robinson, a biophysicist 41 years his junior. After blitzing through a PhD in physics, Robinson was immediately offered a faculty position at UC San Diego, but by the time he turned 30, he knew he wanted to work with Pauling. The consultant Richard Hicks is also hired to bring in money. Pauling resigns from Stanford and throws himself into his work at the institute. Unfortunately, money dries up quickly. Pauling donates half his salary for the first half of 1975, and all of it for the second half. Robinson suggests the institute moves to Oregon in an attempt to win some funding off of Pauling's home state reputation, an unpopular move with Pauling and Hicks. It is here we enter a particularly depressing chapter of Pauling's life. In 1976, Pauling teamed up with Ewan Cameron, a fellow at the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. Cameron wrote a study that showed terminal cancer patients live up to 4 times longer after megadosing vitamin C. There was just one problem. The vitamin C group was labelled untreatable far earlier than the control group. Pauling baselessly claimed that oral vitamin C doses could prevent 75% of cancers in humans. Doctors considered it quackery, but the Mayo Clinic, with nothing to lose, commissioned a follow-up study. By 1977, the institute was imploding. Art Robinson was poorly suited to leadership. He had an unpleasant authoritarian streak and was embracing more and more unconventional cures, much to Pauling's displeasure. Robinson led a new clinical trial on a new age fruit juice diet without consulting Pauling. Pauling sends Robinson a sternly worded memo asking him to consult with him and Hicks before signing off on new trials. On the same day, Robinson fires Hicks. Pauling is furious and asks Robinson to resign. Robinson refuses. Pauling issues a memorandum to employees saying they are to ignore any orders or instructions given or communicated to you by Dr. Robinson. Robinson sends a memorandum of his own. Neither Dr. Pauling nor Mr. Hicks have any authority to remove me from my position. Pauling calls an emergency meeting with the founders and boots Robinson from the clinical trial. Robinson sued the Linus Pauling Institute for $25.5 million. What results is an all-out poo-flinging bonanza. Robinson accuses Pauling of scientific fraud. The dosages recommended by Pauling were actually promoting skin cancer in mice. Robinson claimed that his negative results were destroyed upon his dismissal from the trial. Pauling, meanwhile, called Robinson a liar and said that his lab work was amateurish and inadequate. The endless barrage of lawsuits nearly bankrupted the LPI. Robinson eventually settled for $575,000. In 1979, the Mayo Clinic results came back. Vitamin C megadoses were not a cure for cancer. In a particularly shameful moment of pride, Pauling takes the work public anyway. The 1979 book, Cancer and Vitamin C, is the nadir of Pauling's career. There was no reaching him now. In the introduction, he irresponsibly recommended 12,000 milligrams of vitamin C, up to the bowel tolerance limit in terminal cases. Pauling insisted the Mayo Clinic had gotten their numbers wrong. He was right. He had to be right. Even today, the 1993 edition of the book still gets reviews on Amazon from people desperate to hear a cure. Pauling's advice was undiluted quackery. Throughout the 80s, the Institute began to investigate the treatment of HIV. Pauling co-authored a report claiming that vitamin C megadoses could also be used as a treatment for HIV. These experiments could not be replicated. It is hard not to feel slightly revolted by the LPI's conduct. They opportunistically pivoted to HIV research without taking proper care over the science. Pauling was a sad shadow of his former self. In the eyes of doctors, he was a leper. It was a sad end to a brilliant career in science. Here's how it ended. For all of his faults, Linus Pauling was not a grifter. He wasn't in this to make money. Vitamin C cannot be patented. To his credit, Pauling advised his readers that there is no difference between natural and synthetic vitamin C, and that they shouldn't fall for overpriced natural supplements when cheap ones would do. He genuinely believed he had discovered a cure that would improve the lives of billions, including that of the most important woman in his life. In 1976, Ava Pauling was diagnosed with stomach cancer. She undergoes an operation to remove 3/4 of her stomach. Throughout her recovery, she takes megadoses of vitamin C, on Linus's recommendation. But 5 years later, the cancer recurs, this time inoperable. Ava Pauling passes away on the 7th of December 1981 at age 77. She and Linus were married for 58 years. In 1986, Pauling published his final book on health, How to Live Longer and Feel Better. Pauling offered a 12-step program to improve quality of life. Most of the advice is fairly straightforward. Eat a varied diet with plenty of fruit and vegetables. Keep your sugar intake to a minimum and cut out sugary desserts and soft drinks. Drink alcohol only in moderation. Work a job you like and spend time with loved ones. The top 5 steps all relate to vitamin supplements. Step 1, of course, is to megadose vitamin C. Do not miss a single day. In 1991, Pauling was diagnosed with rectal cancer. He takes the illness public in 1992 and attributes his long life to his health regimen. Pauling died on the 19th of August, 1994. In his last public appearance, 2 months before his death, he is brought to a lecture theatre in a wheelchair by his son, Linus Jr. His face is white with pain, but he refuses to be brought out before the audience in a wheelchair. He walks to the podium to thunderous applause. The FBI closed their investigation on Linus Pauling in 1972. His file was 2,500 pages long. In the eyes of the investigators, Pauling was an exhibitionist, egotistical, and an intense publicity seeker, but as far as they could tell, he was not a communist. In the 1980s, Art Robinson entered Republican Party politics. In the 90s, he advocated for nuclear waste to be sprinkled over the oceans to build up public tolerance to radiation, and throughout the 2010s, he built up a collection of thousands of vials of frozen human urine. He was elected to the Oregon State Senate in 2021. In 1996, the LPI was moved to Oregon State, where it remains to this day. While research is still being conducted on the properties of vitamin C, the Institute has quietly distanced itself from the exaggerated claims of its founder. Ironically, Pauling's advocacy of vitamin C as a miracle drug led to the topic being radioactive throughout the 90s and 2000s. Recently, intravenous vitamin C has shown promising results as a treatment for ovarian cancer, albeit in much smaller doses than Pauling was prescribing. Linus never lived to 100, but his sister Pauline did. Remember her? She made it to 101. And remember this guy, Pauling's old roommate? He married her in 1976. All of the Pauling siblings remained friends until the end. Linus Pauling was a complicated figure. He was stubborn and let his ego get the better of his scientific judgment. Whatever his intentions may have been, he irresponsibly and rashly pushed cures and treatment plans on the public without doing the research to back them up. And despite all of that, he remains one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. In the worlds of structural and theoretical chemistry, Linus Pauling is a name that will never die. His papers from the 30s and 40s are masterpieces of scientific writing. He bravely fought back against the political oppression of the Red Scare. No matter the risks to his career, he tirelessly advocated for peace and international cooperation. His work ethic, courage, and creativity were inspirations to generations of scientists. In 1961, an audience member at one of Pauling's lectures in California asked him about the role of ethics in science. Pauling smiled. "I have something that I call my golden rule. It goes something like this. Do unto others 25% better than you expect them to do unto you. The 25% is for error." Thanks for watching. Hello again, I'm recording this on February the 8th, 2025, not 2021, as I said in part 1. Leave it to me to cock something up in the last 2 minutes of the video. If you were a fan of this documentary, please consider having a look at my Patreon. I will draw you a cool picture for the price of a takeout coffee, probably substantially cheaper than a takeout coffee actually, they're like £48 near me. If you want a more in-depth treatment of Pauling's life, Force of Nature by Thomas Hager is by far the best biography of him ever written. Honestly, fantastic book, just could not have made the video without it. Absolutely indispensable. If you want to learn more about valence bond theory, the field that Pauling won his first Nobel Prize for, Shared-Electron is a pretty good textbook. A bit technical for YouTube and even for most chemistry undergraduates, but I found it interesting, so it's getting mentioned anyway. Thank you to Professor Dave and BritMonkey for their wonderful narration. Please consider giving them a watch. Thank you to all of the musicians whose work was featured in this video. Please support them through whatever means you can. And thank you to Brilliant for giving me money of their own free will. Baffling decision, really, but appreciated nonetheless. And thank you to you! Yes, you, the unwashed, smelly viewer. If you're young and impressionable, please show my videos to everyone at your school. They definitely will not shove you into a locker. Or draw a cock on your planner.